Hey beautiful people, welcome back to Missily Magnificent. My question to you today, do you respond in ways and situations that you don't like, but you have trouble stopping this way of responding? If that's the case, we might be talking about our trauma responses, and we're going to talk about that today. But what I want you to do first is hit the subscribe button so that you can get more videos as they come forth each week. My name is Crystal Turner, and I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner who's going holistic. And this channel is all about bringing the knowledge I've gained as being a nurse practitioner in psychiatry and bringing that information, but also going beyond that information that we get in Western medicine and utilizing metaphysical principles as well as African-centered principles so that we can expand beyond the lived experience we're having currently, especially if it's one that we're not satisfied with. So let's get started. So what's a trauma response? Well, a trauma response is the way that we respond to things when we experience trauma. To go a little bit deeper than that, a trauma response is the way we respond to protect ourselves when we feel like our safety is a threat. So there are several things that I want you to know about trauma responses and how they can show up and limit your joy and your success in whatever way it is that you would like to have it in life. So the first thing I want you to know is that a trauma response doesn't start out as a trauma response. It starts out as a stress response. So trauma responses are the things that cause us to have some complications in our life, responding in those ways. But stress response is actually a good thing, and it's the first thing that we experience before it gets to ever being a trauma response. When we talk about stress response, what I want you to think about is a stress response is a way that we respond to a situation to protect ourselves in a moment when there is an actual threat. A trauma response, on the other hand, is our way of responding to a situation as if there is a threat, but there's not really a threat anymore. So it causes a lot of problems in our life. But when we're talking about a stress response, what I want you to envision is a lion, that you're faced head on with a lion, because a lion really does signify a threat to our safety, a threat to our life, right? And when we are responding to a true threat, a stress response is important, because when we have a stress response, it causes our adrenaline to raise, which gives us more strength, gives us more stamina. Also, we are able to zone into what is needed at the moment. So a lot of our bodily functions might shut down in the moment so that we can zone in to deal with the threat that is truly at hand. And it gives us just more power to be focused on protecting self. So that's a stress response. And a lot of times when people have dealt with trauma, especially in childhood, and something is happening that's causing you high levels of stress, because this is how things start first, these high levels of stress, that stress response is there to help you get through those moments. The problem is when we are dealing with traumas and adversities in childhood, which brings about stress, and it becomes heightened and becomes really impactful, we tend to still keep those stress responses, and they develop into trauma responses as we begin to live from a place of being traumatized. So when you think of that, think of a long-term experience of how you're dealing with the stress from a place of feeling traumatized or feeling unsafe or feeling there's a threat. When we do that and we cause that to be the patterns of how we deal with things, that stress response, we start using that way of coping even in situations 20 years later. It can be a trauma response, especially when we're responding as if there's a trauma, but there are no more traumas around us. But these are the coping strategies that we've learned. These are the things that worked once upon a time, and it can be what you still draw upon in your adult life, but to no avail, because it really starts to cause more complications in your life than you would like. And if that's the case, that's why you're listening to this video. So let's just talk about these 4 different responses and how they can show up and limit your life. So the 4 trauma responses are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So fight trauma response is just that. It's where you feel like you have to protect yourself. If you think about that lion, you're cornered by this lion, and there's nothing else you can do but literally physically fight to get away from it. It's like there's no other option. It's all or nothing, and you're going in with it. And in childhood, if that's been a possibility for a person to truly be able to fight, and that's been the way of dealing with situations, that can be taken into adulthood. And that fight trauma response looks like a lot of anger. It can look like rage. It can be physically fighting. It can be verbal altercations a lot of times. And again, like I said, this can be in simple matters. Do you feel like you're somebody who goes from 0 to 1,000 when you're upset about something or if someone disagrees with you? Do you feel like you lose sense of self and sense of control because you go into a rage over situations? And then afterwards, you might deal with a lot of shame or guilt because you may see that you've overreacted. The thing about this type of response and trauma response is, yes, it can cause a lot of issues with safety, but it can also cause a lot of issues with your relationships and people not really wanting to deal with you because of this level of anger, this temper, this rage that you may carry. And it can cause you to end up not having as many relationships as you would desire because people could be afraid, or they could just be at a point where they don't want to deal with relationship where there's this level of anger and rage there. But it can leave you to feel isolated, leave you to feel, again, like there's guilt and shame there. And it can really take away a joy in life, especially with relationships. So that's trauma response number 1. The second trauma response is flight trauma response. When we talk about flight trauma response and we go back to that lion and you think about what we would do if we have room and we're not cornered, we're going to run and try our best to get away from that lion, try to avoid it by all means necessary. And yes, if there's truly a threat, to run from something to get to safety makes sense. When we are dealing with that adrenaline, it'll cause us to be able to run at speeds we have never run before because we are understanding that there's a threat when we're dealing with that stress response. But when this becomes a trauma response and we bring this into our adulthood, when we feel like a situation is not safe, we may run from it, which also can look like avoiding a situation, steering clear of people and relationships, not dealing with matters that may need to be discussed, because we can even see the conversation as highly threatening, especially if you've grown up in a home that had domestic abuse and violence, or you saw your parents arguing at a very volatile way. Those things can really, make you feel like avoidance, right? It could be a way to view how confrontation is. Confrontation to some people can look like violence because that's what they've seen confrontation as. Everyone hasn't seen confrontation as two people having disagreement and being able to still talk it out. Some people have seen confrontation and the only thing they can see it as is when people disagree, it gets violent, and when you are dealing with this flight trauma response, avoidance is a key component of that. And it causes you to not deal with things in life. It can cause you to procrastinate and avoid conversations, dealing with family issues, dealing with, personal relationship issues, dealing with work that needs to be done. It can spill into so many aspects of your life, and it can take away your joy because you can then not really deal with matters and have some challenges in some relationships if things aren't being done, if conversations aren't being had, if things aren't being resolved. So that's trauma response number 2, the flight trauma response. The third trauma response. Think about this lion that you're encountered with, and you can't run. You are afraid to fight it, so you play dead and you lay down and you don't move. And sometimes a threat leaves if it thinks that you're dead or thinks that you're not there. When we think about this lion, it may just leave you alone, and the hope is that it will leave you alone. And when we're talking about being beyond a stress response and we're in our actual lives and we view certain situations as probably just as daunting as that. For some people, when we're dealing with trauma, the trauma and the experiences can be just as daunting, depending on what a person has experienced. So when we're talking about the freeze trauma response, it really can look like inaction, not taking action, literally freezing on the inside, not knowing what decision to make, not trusting yourself to make a decision. And so from that, things also don't get taken care of, and it can cause you to not go after what it is that you really in your heart of hearts would desire to go after in life. It can make you not go toward relationships that you really would like. It can cause you not to have conversations with people in your life in relationship to matters that really do concern you. So you end up shutting off the importance of your needs because you don't trust yourself, you don't trust the actions, you don't trust what your response will end up causing to be the effect of that. So it could be really being afraid of making a decision because you just don't know what the outcome is going to be and be fearful of the outcome. So the freeze trauma response really can cause us to be in inaction in our life. And of course, this can cause problems and we could start feeling like we're left behind in life. So that's trauma response number 3. And now we're going to talk about the fawn trauma response, number 4. When we think about fawn, you can think about the infamous people pleaser, in childhood, for a lot of people actually, as youth, many may fall into a fawn trauma response because in some situations and in many situations, you're a kid, you can't fight, you may be in a situation where you can't run away or it's not come to you to think of running away or and not doing anything may not also be an option. But to fawn means to befriend someone. And many people who deal with the fawn trauma response, they befriend their abuser with the hope that the abuser will be kind to them and be nice to them. So they may go out of their way to appease them, to please them, to get on their good side. Now, when there's a true stress going on where someone needs to do this, yes, again, we get that. When we think about the lion, if you could simply give the lion some kind of food and it go away, you would be giving it everything you could, right? So that it would just leave you alone. But when we're adults and we are functioning in a place where our mind is still in the adversities we've experienced or the traumas we've experienced, we can see situations around us as highly threatening still, even when they're actually not. And so that can look like being a people pleaser to the people around you. People who maybe you don't even care for that much. You're going out your way to please them. People who you do care about, you're still going out of your way to please them. And you're not taking into account your own personal needs. And this can cause a lot of resentment. To the people that you're trying to appease, but especially to yourself, because deep down in your heart that when you're people pleasing, you're betraying a part of yourself and you're not really being true to yourself. You're not really speaking up or standing up for what it is you would really desire. You're trying to make it through the moment so that you can appease someone, so you can get a good response from them, so there's no conflict, so there's no stress with disagreement that can come with that and whatever we make that out to be in our mind. So the people pleaser, the fawn trauma response is one that really can cause us to be really unhappy with ourselves and really resentful toward other people, but highly resentful toward ourselves. And that's no way to be. So these are the trauma responses that I talk about often, that I've probably seen all of these in me at some point in my life. I've gone through my own share of adversity, and I've definitely used these ways of functioning until I got to the point where it's like none of these are really bringing me joy, and it was time for me to really step up and meet the higher version of who I am, who is not wallowing in those experiences of the past, who's rising up from them, who's becoming stronger because of them. I will be having a 6-week program, Sacred Circle program, happening mid-July. So I'll be keeping you in touch and engaged with that program, and it really is talking about how to use metaphysical principles to bring about a different experience in life, even after we've experienced pain, and especially after we've experienced pain. But if any of these trauma responses resonate with you, put it in the comments section. It's the fight trauma response, the flight trauma response, the freeze trauma response, and the fawn trauma response. If any of these resonate with you, put it in the chat, in the comment section. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Also share this video with someone who you think it may help. My goal is to really be able to reach as many people as I can, to be able to bring about an expanded experience with healing from our emotional states. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video. Toodles.